next up, guys, we got the co-main event of the evening where Jake Matthews is going to be taking on Michael Morales. And shout out to my Action Network colleague, Dan Tom MMA. He does that Jake Matthews impression every time of his father. It makes me laugh. So that's what just came to my head as I was breaking this down. But in any case, we've got Michael Morales here, who is entrenched as a big favorite. Let's take a look at the lines. And courtesy of Bet Online right now, I'm just looking at fightodds.io. He's sitting about minus 280, minus 250, best available in the market. Minus 275 seems like the commonly available number. And you've got, on the other hand, Jake Matthews here, who is 19-6 overall as a professional, 12-6 in the UFC. Something that stood out to me, though, is I was making my previous performance in odds range document, and it's not finished yet. But one thing that I did notice is that you look at Jake Matthews, he's only been an underdog 3 times in a very lengthy UFC career. So that's something that kind of stood out to me just off the rip, because he's a pretty substantial underdog in this spot. I've actually faded Jake Matthews when he was an underdog before and cashed. So it's not like, because he hasn't been an underdog a lot, it means something, everything's contingent on the matchup. But I just thought that was a really interesting note, right? He's had a lot of UFC experiences and he hasn't been an underdog very frequently. For what it's worth, he is 2-1 as an underdog in his previous performances. So that's pretty good stuff. I'm looking back at my own previous bets on Jake Matthews. I've only ever bet one money line on a Jake Matthews fight ever, which was 3.1 units on Sean Brady minus 200 against Jake Matthews. He was able to go out there and get the win. But I do think that when you look at a guy like Sean Brady, he's got very good wrestling, very good grappling, and he just was a really awkward style matchup, I felt like, for Jake Matthews, because Jake Matthews is a guy who used to fight at 155 pounds, and he was taking on a muscle-bound, low center of gravity welterweight who's got a really good takedown and top pressure game, and I just felt like that was going to be a disaster for him. And eventually in that fight, Sean Brady was able to find that third-round arm triangle choke, so it kind of played out a little bit to my expectations, but I haven't been one to fade Jake Matthews with a lot of consistency. I bet Jake Matthews by submission against Matthew Semmelsberger, and that was a fight where he ended up on the wrong end of a unanimous decision. He got hurt several times in that fight. He got dropped, if my memory serves. So let's pull up the UFC stats for Jake Matthews so we can talk about this one in earnest. Yeah, 3 times he was dropped by Matthew Semmelsberger. However, we should take into account Matthew Semmelsberger in wins and in losses has a ridiculous knockdown rate. He's recorded 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 knockdowns in his UFC run. So Matthew Semmelsberger is just a knockdown machine. Want to give him that credit as well. But Jake Matthews, he's been on the receiving end of the 3 knockdowns from Matthew Semmelsberger, and he was also knocked down by Akbar Areola back in the day. So he's been knocked down a handful of times in the UFC, but he's been around for a long time. And he's got some, solid performances along the way as well. Wins over Darius Flowers in his last fight, Andre Fialho, the first round knockout, that viral reaction. It was pretty funny. But I also remember tweeting after the Diego Sanchez fight that both of them should be cut. Which is brutal. It's a mean thing to say, but I remember saying at the time, just like, if you can't finish this version of Diego Sanchez, what are you really doing in the UFC after all this time? But I just think he was trying to put on a conservative performance. He was on a win streak. He was trying to keep that going. Then he gets the Sean Brady step up. He gets knocked back down in the pecking order. Andre Fialho, he goes out there, he gets the big win. I think he got a little bit overconfident going into that Semmelsberger's fight. He got caught on the chin early, and it's very hard to recover when you've been, knocked down, dropped, and hurt so early on in the fight. Then you look at the Darius Flowers fight, and I think that, some people took the dog shot there on Darius Flowers. 2 guys, very similar age, but Flowers, smaller guy. I think he's cutting down to 155 pounds, if my memory serves. And Jake Matthews just was able to get the win there, without too much issue. So now when he's taking on Michael Morales, Morales is just 24 years of age, young man, again, younger than I am. So hats off to you, brother. Young man out there on the prowl, ready to get after it and scrap. Always love to see it. And he's going to be the bigger fighter here. He's going to have a substantial 7-inch reach advantage. He's also going to have a 1-inch advantage in height. So very impressive stuff. And I think that when I'm looking at a guy like Michael Morales, he's on a lengthy win streak. So, that the public is going to be very much behind him. And I understand that. You look at the last couple performances, gets the win via unanimous decision over Max Griffin, good fighter, solid. Adam Fugit gets the win via knockout in that fight. I think he dropped him on multiple occasions, if my memory serves. Knocked out Officer Trevin Giles. Another great performance. And then on the Contender Series, I believe he was an underdog against Veratitnikov or something, Veratnikov, and he was able to go out there and get the win as well. Let me see if we can find the specifics here on Michael Morales. I don't know that I don't know that I've ever bet on a Michael Morales fight, as a matter of fact. Doesn't seem like I have. Wow. Okay. So interesting note there. I don't know that I've ever bet on a Michael Morales fight, but the best way to check is that I have bet on a Jake Matthews fight. So shout out to betmma.tips. If you guys don't use it, that's okay. Everybody do your own thing. But I like it because it tells me if I've previously bet on these fighters before. And the truth is, I've never bet on a Michael Morales fight. He went from being a plus 210 underdog on the Contender Series against Nikolai Voretnikov, and now he is out to a substantial minus 275 favorite in his third UFC fight over Jake Matthews. So it's very interesting. I think that, when you look at the Tapology votes as well, it goes to show the public's really behind Morales here. 86% on the Morales side on the Tapology voting. So I think that this is a interesting fight on paper. Jake Matthews is a guy that I believe has gone through some interesting personal developments. I think he's taken on a new religion. I think he might be training with new guys. I think he does a lot of different things that maybe he didn't used to. I think he might be more disciplined in his approach these days. So I'm kind of curious to see what we get from Jake Matthews in this fight. I think that Morales is a guy that is probably going to look to play this fight out on the feet. Let me just look back at his record, and let's pull up Michael Morales on Tapology and give him a fair evaluation, because we kind of went through some of the performances on the Jake Matthews side. So Michael Morales, um, you know, prior to getting into the UFC, he wasn't fighting a very high level of competition or very experienced guys. And so when you look at the one submission win on his record, it shows as a triangle choke against 0-0 Gregoris Cisneros, who's now 5-6 as a professional. So I'm not sure what that really goes to tell us about his ground game. Obviously, the guys that you think could potentially test that would be a Veretnikov, a Fugit, a Giles, maybe even a Max Griffin. So I'm gonna go ahead and look and see what I can glean from the tape about his ground game. But Jake Matthews is a guy that does have some power of his own on the feet, has recorded some knockdowns. Also is a guy that seems to have a tactical approach when he's trying to fight these guys. And obviously he got blasted early by Semmelsberger, didn't really get to see his game plan play out very much there. But I do think that let's look back and see if there is anything that stands out here. I mean, Jake Matthews has not been finished in the UFC via strikes since Kevin Lee back in 2016. So that's interesting in and of itself. He was able to survive that fight with Semmelsberger despite being knocked down a bunch of times. But I don't know if that says more about Matthews or if it says more about Semmelsberger's finishing instinct in that fight. But we do have a guy here in Morales, 3-0 in the UFC. So not a ton of reason to doubt him yet. But at 15-0, he does seem like a very public side. And he does seem like a guy who, with only 3 decisions to his name, with only 1 win by submission, a lot of his wins coming by knockout, seems like a guy that people are going to get, behind here bigly. So I think it's a really interesting spot. I don't have a strong lean here, but if I had to, give a take, I said co-main event, no strong thoughts. Gut says dog or pass / Morales KO. That's how I feel about this. Those would be the 2 ways I'd look to play it based on my gut leans on this fight. So with the first fight, the main event, I had said that the fight doesn't go the distance, maybe some alternate unders. That's kind of my first, gut lean. And the same could be said for the co-main event. I don't have the strongest feelings about a side here, but my gut does says from a money line standpoint, we're looking at a dog or pass. And from a prop standpoint, Morales by KO would be the way I would look to play Morales if I was on his side this week. Jordan Levitt and Chase Hooper is up next, and it's a fascinating fight. But first, we got a shout out to Jake Fagan in the comment section here for the dono, brother. Thank you so much. He says, thanks for taking the time to help give us people an edge before these lines move too much, man. That's always the goal here, right? And again, whether you're with me or against me, whether we end up being on the same side or different sides, I'll try and give you a perspective on both fighters, And with Paul Craig, I do think he's made some small improvements to his striking. I don't think he's as technical as Brendan Allen, but I think both guys have that potential to win by KO. That's why we mentioned that. Same thing when I'm talking about in this fight, I don't have any bets on the fight, right? So I'm not saying that I'm going to go bet Jake Matthews, but from a gut feeling, from a first look, does feel like a dog or pass to me, just because you got one guy with so much UFC experience who's rarely been a dog and who's performed well as a dog against a guy who's been a dog on the Contender Series, and now he's a favorite because he's gotten a couple big wins. So I just think that this could be a comeback to earth performance. But I also haven't been a big Jake Matthews guy. I've never bet on him before. So for me, that's the thing that's making me hesitate in this spot.